Hello, my name is Julie, and it's time to talk about all the books I read in June. I usually start these monthly wrap-ups with some sort of preamble about the month, but I've got nothing. I read 13 books, which is above average for this year, but about average for normal Junes for me. I read 4,188 pages, which is average for this year, but is the lowest amount of pages I've read in June in the last 5 years. I had an average of 3.73, which is a bit below par, and I had no books that I gave a 5-star. The average page count of a book was 322 pages, and I read about 139 pages a day. I have read 4 books that I owned physically or on audio. I added 2 books to my TBR, so I have an annual net TBR shelf of -7. As far as star ratings go, I am entirely within the realms of 3 stars and 4 stars. For my pie charts, I read all the genres under the sun, but mostly fantasy. I read more books in series than usual, almost half, with 2 first in series, 2 sequels, and 1 conclusion, and the rest were standalones. As usual, around a third of my books were on audio, but I did sneak 1 ebook in. Then for my author familiarity chart, we have something new appearing. 5 of the books I read this month were from authors that were new to me. 6 of them were from authors that I had read before 2025, and 2, for the first time this year, were repeat authors, but authors that I read from for the first time this year. I desperately need a nap, so let's just get started on our first book. This month, I did a reading vlog called Do It or DNF. I had a mug of prompts, and I had to pick a series that went along with that prompt, and I either had to read that series right now or I had to DNF the series forever. And in that, one of the books that I read was The Bloodless Princess by Charlotte Bond. This is the second in a fantasy novella duology about our main character Madeleine, who is a female knight. This is not common in this world, and she has been kicked out of whatever her knight group is, and she is, in the first book, trying to get back her honor by getting the Fireborn blade, which it has been said cannot be taken by any man. So she thinks she's a woman, maybe she can get it, and she wants to kill a notorious dragon with it. And in this sequel, a woman who she came across in the first book, Saralina, who is a mage, and her are working together to try to go to the underworld to meet the Bloodless Princes, the people who are in charge of the underworld, and get something from them. As a person who adores the fantasy genre, I tend to stay away from novellas. I usually feel like they're not long enough. The novellas that I do end up picking up have such cool ideas that they have tempted me away from what is normally a rule for me. And I do think that this series was not an exception for me. While I think a lot of the ideas are cool in this series, I wish that these books were full-length novels in order to give us a full idea of what's going on. Partially because, particularly in the first book, but it appears in the second book as well, around half of our time is not actually spent with the characters. It is spent going over history or folklore or journals of people from the past in this world. So not only is it a novella, but I'm not even spending all the time with the main characters to get to know them. I do think this world with dragons in it was interesting. I really liked in this book getting to know more about the dragon's perspective on history. I liked that this almost had a bit of like a Greek myth feel of the going to the underworld deal. Having finished the first book, I do think it was worth my time to spend, an afternoon listening to the audiobook of the second one, but I don't think that I would push someone who is like me, who isn't a fan of novellas, to reading this. I think I'm giving this a 3.5. I don't think this does anything wrong within the content of the book. I just think it needed more. And the other book I read this month for that video was The Wicked King by Holly Black. This is the second book in the freaking fairy series. Realm of not the Realm of the Elderling. Help. Feywild. Help. What is it called? Folk of the Air. It's called the Folk of the Air series. This is the second book in the Folk of the Air series, which is a YA trilogy that has also companion series afterwards of our main character Jude, who is a human. Her mother had escaped from fairy, and when she was a child, her parents were killed by fairies and they were taken back by her half-sister's father, who is a fairy noble. Jude has been raised in fairy, has been in school with the fairy nobility, and she is in this very precarious position where she doesn't necessarily have power like the fairies do. So she, in the first book, decides to kind of go into the spying business. I was convinced for years before reading the first book that this series wasn't going to be for me. And then I read the first book. It surprised me in that I didn't hate it. It wasn't as focused on the romance as I thought it was going to be. I was pleasantly surprised about some things, but I still wasn't very invested. And I knew that this second book is supposed to be the best book in the series, so I thought, you know what, it's a YA book, it's very popular, but I just decided to pick this up and I knew I could knock it out fast. I think there were things that felt novel to me about the first book that didn't necessarily feel like that in the second book, like, again, the flavor of the fairies. I think my overwhelming note for this book is that not a lot happened. It took until like maybe the 80-90% point of the book for any plot to happen. This is more focused on court politics than I think a lot of promotion or talk about this book would have you believe, and I thought that that was good. So I think that that mark was above what I expected the book to be, but like ultimately I didn't think it really executed on anything particularly well. Do I think the characters are that interesting? No. Do I think the plot was engaging? No. Do I think this was well paced? No. Like, there wasn't anything that really knocked it out of the park. And then the ending of the book falls into the exact same patterns of plot that a lot of fantasy romance books do. It was like beat for beat a million other books that I have read, and I believe it's because those books are actually emulating this one. But point is, this was not for me. So I have decided to DNF this series, and I did give this book a 3-star. So that is a series that I can take off of my very long list. Then I read an e-arc of Dream on Ramona Riley by Ashley Herring Blake, which is now for sale, so you can get this in your local bookstores. So thank you to NetGalley and Berkeley, the publisher, for sending this to me. This is about our main character, Ramona, who had dreams of being a costume designer. And when she was in college at this prestigious school to do that, her father ended up getting into a terrible accident, and she had to come home and take care of her much younger sister. And now her sister is about to be going to college, and she suddenly doesn't have the reason to have to stay in her hometown anymore. She has just been working at a coffee shop and kind of spinning her wheels, and her family is trying to encourage her to get back into costuming. Then it turns out that a movie is going to be filmed in their hometown. So this might be a way for her to get some connections in the costuming world, but then it turns out that one of the stars of the movie is Dylan Monroe, who is this wild child celebrity. The two of them, Ramona and Dylan, actually met when they were teenagers and had like a very emotional night together. They are kind of finding their way back to each other. I 100% read this because this is Ashley Herring Blake. I do know that the famous person thing in a romance book is not really for me, but previous Ashley Herring Blake books have also been tropes that I don't normally love, and I decided to read them anyway, and I love them. I feel about this book the way that I have felt about almost every single romance book that I've read this year. I don't feel strongly about it. Ashley Herring Blake's books, while I have given them 5 stars before, they're a little bit more focused on the romance than I normally like my romance books to be. I just don't think this book had a very strong plot. I don't think that the two characters' individual plot lines were done as well as they could have been. Like, there was more room for stuff to happen, and I think the entire impetus on this book relies on the two of them not telling each other stuff. I thought that that was annoying. In a very neutral way, I like these characters together. I just think the conflicts that were shoved on them were annoying. To my memory, of the 4 Ashley Herring Blakes that I've read, so I've read the whole Bright Falls series and this one, I think each of the 4 books has gotten spicier than the previous one. So if that's something you're looking for, you know, you'll find some stuff here that you like. I did like those scenes, but again, in kind of a neutral way. Like, I wasn't as emotionally invested in the characters, so I thought the best friend was actually really annoying. It's making me wonder if I want to read the second book. Did I actually not like this book? I think I wrote this book down as a 3.75, but I think I'm talking myself down while I'm saying this. There were things that I liked about this book. I liked the parts of the individual character plots that we did see. I thought that the filming a movie in a small town part was fun, and I did actually buy the chemistry between our characters. So I thought that this could have used some work. I think I'm leaving it at a 3.5 because I did did enjoy my time. It could go lower. I don't know. Then for the buzzword readathon, I ended up reading The Memory Police for the memory prompt. This is a translated book from Japanese that is about this island where there is this group called the Memory Police. And overnight, they will erase something from the populace's mind, such as at the beginning of the book, perfume is erased. So everybody in the morning wakes up and suddenly starts throwing away all of their perfume. They forget that it existed after it's gone, and if they find any later, they don't even know what it is. Our main character is an author, and she knows that there are some people who are not affected by the memory police. Her editor turns out to be one of these people, and she is trying to work out a way to protect him. This is a book that I've had my eye on for a while, and I have been convinced I'm going to love it, and I was absolutely right. This is the best book that I've read this month. This is what I want in a dystopian book. I think that this is a very good commentary on a lot of different things. It's talking about the importance of freedom of speech and language. It talks about police states and fascism, and it also talks about the normalization of terrible things. As things keep getting taken away by the memory police, the general consensus by people is, it's all right, we'll live without it, everything's gonna be fine. They can't possibly take the next thing away. And then they do, because the previous steps to that have been normalized. The language in this book is fairly sparse, but because of the nature of the story, I thought that actually served the purpose. And I think that the ending of this book won't work for everyone, but it was exactly what I wanted from this book. I think that if you liked I Who Have Never Known Men, that this could be a book for you. It's a similar stripped back dystopian story. I feel like I don't have words for this book because I think this book did everything that it set out to do in such a brief way. Also, I forgot to mention that I really enjoyed when we are seeing what the main character is writing as her next book in the story. I think that the way that it played back and forth between the story within a story and the main narrative worked really well together in a way that a lot of authors try to do and fail. Absolutely recommend this one. And also, I mean, look at this cover. It's gorgeous. And I'm giving this a 4.5 right now. It could get bumped up. Then I listened to The Ballad of Jakot, Deah by Brian E. Cameron. This is a historical fiction that is inspired by the myth of Jakot Deah, a rumored 17th century pirate who we do not actually have proof of her existing during her lifetime. There are no first-hand accounts of her, but stories of her popped up around the beginning of the 1900s. This takes place in what is now known as Haiti. We know at the beginning of the story that Jakot is set to be killed, and we are seeing her story up until then. She was raised by a French father and born to a Haitian mother who has since passed, and so she is living this in-between life, and we see her fight up against people who are privileged and are taking advantage of other people as she is trying to make lives for herself and her friends, and how her life turns to pirating. I was very excited to see a queer pirate book show up on a list of Pride book recs, so I decided to check this out. I thought that this book was all right. I don't think that it really stood out in any particular way. I do think the narration of the audiobook was pretty good. I think that this book skips around in time a whole lot, which is something that I tend not to love. I didn't think that any of our characters were particularly well developed. We're supposed to have a little bit of like a found family thing, but like none of them stand out at all. Not even Jakot's girlfriend. I guess I would have expected a little bit more action type stuff from a book that is talking about pirates, but I thought it was, you know, an interesting setting. It definitely gives off a bit of Pirates of the Caribbean vibes because it's about pirates in the Caribbean. And I think it is interesting to see a character who has been sort of turned away from her own values when she has been met with so much violence against her. And it was great to read a book that is by a queer Black disabled author write about a queer Black disabled character. Yeah, I do think Jakot is basically the only interesting part of this book, but I kind of wish that we had more of an internal view of her. I just kind of felt like this skipped around a little bit too much to be as engaging as I would have liked it to be. I didn't think it was particularly fast-paced. It was all right. So I'm giving this book in the realm of a 3-star. Then I listened to The River Has Roots by Amel Al-Maltar. This is one of the 2 authors of This Is How You Lose the Time War, and this is her solo debut. It is a fantasy novella about 2 sisters who live on the edge of fairy, and they have this job where they have to sing to the trees that border fairy to help enchant them. This is a novella, so I do want to be vague. This is a 2025 release that I wanted to get my hands on because a lot of people have been hyping it up, but I haven't actually heard that many people talk about the content of the book, and it's because it is pretty short. But I think that if you are looking for a book that feels like a fairy tale, that feels like a story is being read to you, if you love audiobooks, listen to this on audiobook, because we do have inserts of different things like singing of the main characters or sound effects. I really enjoyed the relationship of the two sisters here. I feel like a lot of plot lines that you see about sisters in this sort of setting have a specific angle that they go down, and this decided to go down what felt a little bit more of like a truer path to me. The magic in this world also is related to grammar and language. Rhyming riddles is something that happens a lot. I just love the language that was used here. I thought that it was able to convey very strong emotions about its characters in a short amount of time, and I thought that the story felt like a brand new fairy tale. This is one that I could see myself voting for in the Goodreads Choice Awards at the end of the year. Highly recommend. I think I'm settling on a 4.25 right now. That feels right. Then I read Death of the Author by Deah. This is another 2025 release that is a general fiction / science fiction. Our main character, Zelu, is disabled. She's paraplegic and the child of African immigrants. And after having a bunch of career blunders, is sort of at a low point and under duress, starts writing a story that is so unlike anything she's ever written before. And it is about these robots who are living on Earth after the end of humanity. It becomes an overnight success. She is suddenly very wealthy. There is a movie that is going to be made and everything. And she is still having to live her life and figure out what she is going to do with the success, and how people do not necessarily like how she is handling success. So we see from Zelu's perspective, we see briefly from interviews with her different family members who are often extremely critical of Zelu. And we also see chapters from Rusted Robots, the book that Zelu has written. I think that this is an incredibly innovative book. I think that this book is going to win a ton of sci-fi awards, and you should read it. This book was not like a new favorite of all time, but this is one of those books that I am going to be recommending very widely, because we see from the perspective of Zelu, we also see this subconscious perspective of her writing, and we see the outer perspective from her family. We just get this really intricate portrait of Zelu as a character. And there's some things that you'll probably come into question about her. You're not going to agree with every single thing that she does. I think other reviewers have been way more critical of Zelu than I am. There's very few things that Zelu's done that I did not agree with. Zelu is not a 100% perfect person, but she is so overwhelmingly criticized by all of the people around her that nothing she does will ever be right to them. She is having to work hard to live under those conditions. And I think that that is really admirable. And she is just trying to get to a point where she can live as herself. All these people are like, well, why are you doing this thing and then this thing and then this thing? It's like, well, I'm just trying to get to be somebody I can be proud of. And I think that that is very interesting. I think the original pitch of this book was that the story that she writes starts coming to life, and it's really not as literal as that. There are a lot of parallels in what is going on in both of our perspectives. Technology is advancing in Zelu's timeline, and she is taking advantage of those things. This isn't a plot-heavy book. I think it's an ideas book, and I think that it conveys a very complicated message to the reader that I think a lot of people will get something out of. And that ending, oh my god. I read something into the ending that I don't think everybody is going to read into the ending. It is left with a question mark on purpose, but I was definitely like, okay. I think Deah was very self-aware with this book. Clearly, this book is about an author who writes sci-fi, so it's going to be personal and that sort of thing, but I just really enjoyed like the tongue-in-cheek moments that she had with us. It's really great. Go read it. I think I'm also giving this a 4.25 along with The River Has Roots. If you have stuff to say about Death of the Author, I would love to chat about it with somebody. Forgive the sticker, but I read The Mimicking of Known Successes by Malka Alder. This is a novella. It is a gas lamp sci-fi murder mystery that's supposed to be Holmesian. It is the first in a novella series as well, and it takes place on Jupiter. We have our two main characters, Masa and Platy. Masa is an investigator, and Platy is a researcher who is trying to help humanity return to Earth. And these two are actually exes. Masa finds out about this disappearance of a man, and she thinks it is tied to Platy's place of work and is roping her into helping. I don't normally love novellas, but look, I read The River Has Roots. The River Has Roots was a good novella. But Julie, you're saying, why? Why did you pick up another novella? Because also it was cheap. I have read a good amount of sci-fi fantasy murder mystery things lately, and there's very few that actually work for me. And part of the reason why it doesn't always work for me is because you as the reader don't know all of the logic here. I did not love this book. I did not feel connected to it at all. I did not like the writing style of it. I think it was pretentious, and it was trying to use like heightened language in a way that didn't feel like it served the story at all. It just felt like it was trying to impress you. If I took a shot every time this book used the word August as an adjective, I probably would have passed out. There were all the just writing tics that this author had that annoyed me. On top of that, this is a very short book, so I don't think we even got to know our characters very well. I do not feel like they really established that these characters used to be dating. I don't feel like either of these characters are fleshed out at all. I didn't connect to them. Honestly, the thing that I liked about this book was the atmosphere, the setting, the vibes. I thought that having this really cloudy gas lamp world on Jupiter, on these man-made platforms where you have to always be covering your face when you're walking around, felt really unique. It had a very strong atmosphere in that way, but that was kind of the only thing that I felt like was successful in this book. So maybe I shouldn't be giving it a 3. I don't know. I hardly remember the things that happened to this, even though I read this, a couple weeks ago. I wrote down that I'm giving this a 3, but maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should give it lower than that. And, that seems to be a trend for this month. Then I listened to They Were Her Property by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. This is a nonfiction that is talking about married white women during American slavery and how they participated in and contributed to the slave trade and slavery in general. Because there is this sort of idea that women who are more delicate weren't involved in slavery at all, and that we should be looking at the white men, or maybe that only widows would have slaves. But in reality, there were a significant portion of married white women who were active in slavery as a whole. And what this book does is it shows us lots of different documented examples about how married white women participated and how they were trained to be part of the slave trade from a very young age, how they were very savvy in looking after their property, and how they were incentivized to continue on with the slave trade because it was one of the very few types of property they were allowed to have. Here are some of my takeaways from the book. White women were raised from a young age to be brutal to enslaved people. Enslaved people were often given to white women as their sole property, even married women. There were a lot of prenuptial things to make sure those slaves would not be their husbands. White women were active in meting out punishment to their slaves. White women were active at auctions, and they were savvy in the way that they treated enslaved people as property and were active in the sales of their own enslaved people. One of the ways that white women were most involved and most invasive was in hiring wet nurses. These wet nurses were to put the white babies above their own, and having a wet nurse actually gave a lot of married white women independence from the home that no other women had. Similarly, white women also acted as madams to enslaved women brought into the sex trade. White women also participated in refugeeing when the Civil War started, which was moving often to Texas or northern slave states in order to to avoid their enslaved people being taken from them. After the war ended, white women actively lied to the government to keep formerly enslaved people theirs, even after they were emancipated, and took steps to try to keep the institution. This book is very informative. Each chapter has like a subject it is talking about, and it is going to give you a ton of examples of different women and what they did. A lot of the interviews that are being cited here are from when the Freedmen's Bureau went around the South talking to formerly enslaved people, and I thought it was interesting to actually hear those points of view. I do, however, think this book was fairly dry. Like, this would not be a nonfiction that I recommend to someone who solely reads fiction, because it is not a narrative nonfiction in any way. It is sort of example, example, example. And in that way, it's not written in a particularly interesting way. I think this book absolutely serves the academic purpose that it set out to do. It didn't stand out in the other purposes it could have served. Then I read Eat the Ones You Love by Sarah Maria Griffin for the Literally Dead book club this month, and this is a book that is a bit inspired by Little Shop of Horrors. Our two main characters are women who have both gotten out of long-term relationships. One of them has also lost her job and is coming back to live with her parents, and the other runs a flower shop that is in a mall that has been threatening to close down for years now. The character who's out of a job ends up coming across the flower shop and is absolutely enchanted by it and the woman at the counter, and ends up accepting a job there. But what she doesn't know is that the woman who owns the shop actually has a man-eating plant there who they are tightly connected and is threatening all of the people who are at the mall. I started this book. I thought that this could be a brand new favorite. The writing style of this was absolutely up my alley. This kind of reminded me of like the Chlorine Bunny writing style that I adore. Dreamlike feeling, but just the atmosphere of it all felt so up my alley, so intriguing. And in the beginning of this book, I was super obsessed, did not want to put it down. I thought that the perspective that this book was written from was fantastic. I think that it had a very unique narrative voice that surprised me and that I think a lot of people will find fun. I think the further that this book went along, the more it sort of loses traction. I don't think we get as attached to these characters as I would have liked. I would have liked to see more from their relationship. I think this book kind of sets up the relationship between these two characters, and then as soon as these two characters are kind of in the same place all the time, we don't actually see them interacting with each other, and I would have liked to spend more time with that in order to build up more drama, because I think we spend a little bit too much time away from those two as we get perspectives of other people who are in this area. And like having a little bit of those other people I think was good and like built out the idea, but shifting the focus away from where I was invested wasn't my favorite. I do think that this was a very fun horror. I do think I would be recommending this to people who like the same horror books that I love. I think people will really enjoy Baby, the man-eating plant, as a villain. I thought that the, rotting away vibe of it all was very fun. I think the setting of this decrepit mall that people are wanting to save this community space was great, and I would have actually liked to see more about the themes of trying to save this place and why this place is important. So I think at the beginning of this book, this could have been a 5-star, but I think I'm landing on a 4. Then I read The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. This is about Theo and Kit. They were best friends from when they were very young to when they were teenagers. They ended up starting dating, and a couple years into their relationship, they were supposed to go on this anniversary trip of this food and wine tour of Europe. And they ended up breaking up before they could go on the trip. So they have these vouchers to go on the trip at a later time, and they both just happen to go on the same tour because it is the last possible month for them to be able to go on the trip. Theo is in California trying to make it in this bar business that they've made, and Kit is trying to make it as a baker in France. They've not had contact with each other for a while, but they definitely still feel things for each other, and over the course of this food and wine tour, they are going to come back to each other. I have read all of Casey McQuiston's other books, and this is probably tied for my least favorite. First of all, this book has one of the weirdest things I've ever seen a book do. The first part of this book is from Theo's perspective. The first 50%, Theo. The second 50% is from Kit's perspective. And it's like, kind of why. I don't think it necessarily hurt the book, but I don't think it was 100% necessary, because I do think this book is almost entirely about Theo, and it isn't really about Kit. I don't feel like we get to know Kit very well. We get to know Theo a little bit better, but I don't feel like I got this really intense character image of either of these people like I have in Casey McQuiston's other books, where I felt like these people really popped off the page, felt like three-dimensional people. I thought that the setting here of the food and wine tour was lovely. I think a lot of people will enjoy that aspect of the book if you're looking to do a travel type thing. I liked all the different places that we went to. I liked the talking about food and wine. As a smidge of a foodie, I was enjoying myself. I had a couple glasses of Chardonnay while I was reading this book, and it was a lovely time. Oh, I forgot to mention in the synopsis that these two decide to have a hookup competition across the trip, and they actually do hook up with other people. So like, there is a lot of talking about sex in this book. There is a good amount of people hooking up with other people, and not necessarily these two hooking up. Everybody's hooking up with everybody. Everybody who they come across wants to hook up with these people, that sort of thing. And it is a little bit of a fun, slutty time. And if you are looking for a fun, slutty book, for sure. I think some people have been critical of this playing into the slutty bisexual trope, but Casey McQuiston is also bisexual. This is not the first time they've written a bisexual character. I just feel like people, you know, they're living their life. It's fun. I just did not feel strongly about these characters. I did not feel strongly about the plot. I honestly thought that this book went on for a bit too long, and I genuinely forgot what the ending of this book was. I had to like remind myself. This is another like 3.5 romance for me. I don't know. It was okay. There were things that I enjoyed about it. There were things that I was engaged with, but meh. Then I read Wearing the Lion by John Wiswell. This is the author of Someone You Can Build a Nest In, which I read earlier this year and I really enjoyed. And this is a take on the story of Heracles. We are following Hera and Heracles. Hera, of course, hates Heracles because of how much her husband is sleeping around, and she decides to make his life hell. But Heracles is a devout worshiper of Hera, brings her into every moment of his life. When his children are taken away from him because of the Furies that Hera ends up sending down, he is sent into despair. He is trying to find the Olympian responsible and ends up going on all of these different trials. Here's the thing, Hera did not actually mean to kill his children, she meant for him to die. So she is kind of trying to cover up her own tracks and mislead Heracles so that she can buy time to blame it on somebody else. And as Heracles is going on these different trials, we see that things are not exactly happening the way that they happened in the original myths. This book made me think about how we talk about retellings, because I think retellings is a huge category, that there are a lot of different things that can happen. There's kind of like the x-axis of, does the book follow the plot of the original story? And then the y-axis of, is it in the same place? Is it being told in the same way as the original story? So you have the books that are like a retelling, but it is literally just the original myth. Maybe it is told from a new perspective. You have books like this one, where it is set in the same place, but the events of the book do not happen the same way as the original story. You have books where it is the original story, it is just in a new location, where it's gonna have the exact same plot beats, but it's just like, oh, the story's sci-fi now, or the story's set at a high school. And then you have retellings that are more what I've said are interpolations in the past, where they are just taking seeds of the original story, putting it in a whole new place, giving new plot points or whatever. And this ends up being in that top quadrant where things aren't happening the way that they used to in the myth. And I think that this tells a really interesting story about revenge and forgiveness, and how violence is not the answer. You know, we normally think of Heracles as this very strong man, you know, killing a bunch of monsters and everything that nobody else could. But this version of Heracles is absolutely opposed to violence and is wanting to end the violence because of the violence that happened to his children. At first, I wasn't a huge fan of the Hera perspective, and I do think maybe we didn't need like as much of the Hera perspective as we had, but I think that it was a very interesting way to tell this story, giving a little bit more to the god perspective of things. One thing that I thought was very well done was the way that the gods are portrayed. Like, they actively talk about avatars of the gods. They talk about the gods appearing as different natural phenomenons, talk about like the power of Olympus and how sometimes people like disintegrate away from it because they're not strong enough or they're not welcome on Olympus. Stuff like that just felt like someone who wanted to breathe a new life into older myths and not just telling it in a plain way. There were some things that weren't my favorite. Not 100% of the humor in this book landed for me. I know that in original myths and stuff, there are these, I don't know, epitaphs, is that what they're called? You would always hear gray-eyed Athena, where these repetitions of descriptions of the gods are used again and again in the original myths. I'm aware that exists. However, when the same jokes keep getting made about the same characters, I'm like, I know. That got on my nerves a little bit. I wasn't a huge fan of either of the narrators of the audiobook. I wouldn't push anybody away from listening to the audiobook, but maybe do it physically. The beginning of this book, I was feeling a little bit more meh about, and by the end, I thought that the arc that we had here and the story that we were telling in this new way, I thought it was solid. Am I giving this a 3.75 or a 4? I think I gave a 4-star to Someone You Can Build a Nest In, which I do think is a stronger story. So I think I'm landing on a 3.75 for this. And the last book that I read this month was Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I don't know how many people were expecting me to pick this up, considering that this was like on one of my Do I DNF series. Finally got prepped enough to read this, and I felt like I was in a good enough place that I understood what was going on here. But I also think that this is less confusing than Harrow is, because Harrow is the most confusing book I've ever read in my whole life. This is a fantasy sci-fi horror series about a solar system of necromantic people. And in the first book, there is Harrow and Gideon, and they are going to be going to this almost haunted mansion type place, competing against other pairs to try to be the best necromantic pair so that Harrow can be part of the Emperor's entourage. It is simply unlike anything I've ever read. I don't think there's any pitch of this series that does it justice because it's so strange and wild and weird. In this book, we are following Nona, who is a character who we have not seen from before in this series, as she is on this planet that is under threat from a couple different things. There is a city that is being ultra policed. There is this threat of zombies, and also a creature that seems to be bent on harming the planet. Nona is a very naive character who has very little memory and is sort of new to existence, and she is trying to understand the world around her because she has very little context for what is going on. Just like the other books, we are following a character who is very confused, doesn't understand all of the information given to her, and you as the reader sort of have to pick out the pieces of information that she is given that she does not understand. I enjoyed my time with Nona more than I did with Harrow, but I do not think that it's actually a better book. I really enjoy the blend of tones, the blend of genres, and I think that this book gave a lot of interesting backstory and framework for this world that will come into play interestingly in the finale. I think I was a little bit less emotionally invested in this book than I was possibly in the other ones, but I was intellectually invested in the book. I don't know, there was a character in here that reminded me of Peter from the Hunger Games. I was a little bit emotionally devastated by that, so I think I'm sticking with a 4 right now. But I've been talking for way too long. Those are all the books that I read in June. I'd love to know what you read. Let me know if you'd recommend them to me. I'd love to have some more stuff to put on my TBR. And if you read any of these books, I'd love to talk to you about them. If you'd like to see more videos from me, you can subscribe down below, and if you hit that bell, you can be notified when my videos come out so you don't miss them. And if you'd like to find me other places on the internet, you can find me at the links in the description. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.